Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a shocking development that could reshape not only the Israel-Gaza conflict, but also the entire global trade order. The European Union has threatened to impose crippling trade restrictions on Israel if the Gaza violence continues. This is not just another diplomatic statement, it's a direct warning from one of Israel's biggest economic partners. For years, the EU has played a dual role, publicly calling for restraint while privately maintaining lucrative trade deals with Israel. But this time feels different. Public outrage across European capitals is forcing leaders to act more aggressively than ever before. Trade is the backbone of Israel's economy, and Europe accounts for a huge share of its exports. From agricultural produce to high-tech innovations, Israeli goods flood European markets, and European imports fuel Israel's industries. If Brussels truly enforces sanctions, the consequences could be severe. This section will set the stage for what's happening. The EU is no longer limiting itself to words. Instead, it's considering the most powerful weapon in its arsenal, economic pressure. We'll explore the stakes, the political calculations, and the global ripple effects of this bold move. To understand why this threat matters, we need to unpack the numbers. The European Union is Israel's largest trading partner after the United States, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all Israeli exports. In 2023, trade between Israel and the EU reached tens of billions of dollars, spanning pharmaceuticals, electronics, defense technology, and agricultural products. For example, Israeli citrus fruits, avocados, and wines are staples in European supermarkets, while European companies rely heavily on Israeli medical technology and cybersecurity solutions. Cutting off or restricting these flows would instantly create shocks on both sides. While Israel has tried to diversify its markets by reaching out to Asia and Africa, the EU's sheer purchasing power cannot be matched overnight. Even rumors of restrictions could scare off investors and weaken the Israeli shekel. Trade sanctions aren't just financial tools, they are symbols. They show that Europe is willing to put principles before profits. For decades, Israel has relied on strong Western alliances to shield itself from real economic pressure. If Europe breaks that pattern, it could mark the start of a new era where Israel's actions in Gaza carry direct economic costs. That's why this move is being described as a potential game changer. Now let's examine the political motivations in Europe. Why now? Why such a strong stance? The answer lies in public pressure. Across Europe, images of civilian casualties in Gaza have triggered widespread outrage. Protests are erupting in London, Paris, Madrid, Berlin, and Rome. Citizens are demanding that their governments hold Israel accountable in a way that goes beyond rhetoric. For European leaders, staying silent or offering symbolic statements no longer feels sufficient. Some member states like Ireland, Spain, and Belgium are at the forefront, calling for concrete punitive measures against Israel. Others, like Germany and France, are more cautious due to historical ties and security concerns. Yet, the momentum is undeniable. If the EU fails to act, it risks losing credibility with its own people. Beyond that, Brussels wants to show that it can play a stronger role on the global stage. For years, Europe has complained about being sidelined in Middle East diplomacy, usually dominated by the US by wielding trade as leverage. The EU is sending a message it is willing to take risks, break with tradition, and shape outcomes in conflicts beyond its borders. This political shift is just as important as the trade threat itself. What about Israel's response? Israeli officials are pushing back hard against the EU's warnings. They argue that sanctions would be self-defeating, harming European consumers as much as Israeli exporters. For instance, the EU relies on Israeli expertise in agriculture, water purification, cybersecurity, and pharmaceuticals. Any disruption could hurt European industries, especially in times of global instability. At the same time, Israel is already exploring alternatives. Asia, particularly India, China, South Korea, and Japan, has become an increasingly important trading partner. However, these ties are still developing and cannot immediately replace Europe's massive market. Israeli leaders are also framing the EU's threat as unfair and politically biased, claiming Europe is ignoring Hamas's role in the conflict. Domestically, the sanctions threat could backfire by rallying nationalist sentiment. Citizens may view Europe's move as hostile interference, pushing them to support the government's hardline stance even more strongly. Rather than weakening Israel politically, sanctions could create a defensive us versus the world mentality. Still, no matter how Israel spins it, the economic risks are real, and the EU's message cannot be easily dismissed. We now need to discuss the humanitarian angle. Proponents of sanctions argue that economic pressure is the only effective way to curb Israel's military operations in Gaza. They believe that without direct consequences, Israel has little incentive to change its strategy. For human rights groups, this moment is seen as long overdue. They argue that sanctions tie accountability directly to financial power, forcing Israel to reconsider the cost of its actions. But critics warn of unintended consequences. Trade restrictions could hurt ordinary civilians both in Israel and Palestine. In Israel, farmers, small businesses, and workers dependent on exports may feel the brunt of sanctions. In Gaza, the situation could worsen if aid and essential supplies are further disrupted by strained relations. Humanitarian aid often relies on Israeli ports and checkpoints. Sanctions could complicate these flows. This creates a moral dilemma. Will sanctions actually bring peace closer, or will they deepen suffering on both sides? It's a delicate balance, and one the EU will need to consider carefully. The risk is that a move designed to protect civilians might inadvertently make their lives even harder. Turning now to Europe itself, imposing sanctions on Israel would not come without costs for the EU. European industries depend on Israeli products, especially in high-tech and medical fields. For example, Israeli cybersecurity firms protect countless European networks from cyber attacks, while Israeli medical technologies support hospitals across the continent. Agricultural imports also play a role in Europe's food supply. Cutting these links could trigger supply shortages or price hikes. Beyond economics, there are diplomatic risks. The United States, Israel's staunchest ally, may view European sanctions as undermining Western unity at a time when transatlantic cooperation is crucial, whether in Ukraine, energy security, or dealing with China. The EU risks creating tensions with Washington. Some European leaders worry about alienating the US just as much as alienating Israel. This is why the decision is so complex. For Brussels, sanctions would be a bold statement of independence, but they could also expose vulnerabilities. The EU must weigh whether the moral and political gains are worth the economic and diplomatic costs. The regional reaction is another crucial piece of the puzzle. Arab states, especially in the Gulf, are watching closely. For decades, Arab leaders accused the West of shielding Israel from accountability. If Europe follows through, it could strengthen ties between the EU and Arab countries, particularly energy-rich states like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This could benefit Europe strategically, especially in securing energy deals amid global shortages. However, sanctions could also complicate the Abraham Accords, under which Israel normalized relations with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. These countries would be caught in the middle. Do they side with Israel to protect new economic ties, or do they support Palestine to align with regional sentiment? Meanwhile, Iran would seize on the sanctions as proof that Israel is becoming increasingly isolated. This would boost Tehran's narrative across the Arab and Muslim world. Overall, EU action could realign Middle Eastern alliances in ways that go far beyond the immediate Israel-Gaza conflict. Markets and investors are highly sensitive to geopolitical risks. Even the threat of sanctions has already created jitters in Israel's financial sector. The shekel is under pressure, and investors are watching developments closely. If sanctions become reality, we could see capital flight, falling stock prices, and higher borrowing costs for the Israeli government. Credit rating agencies might downgrade Israel's rating, increasing the cost of debt and limiting access to global markets. For ordinary Israelis, this could mean rising inflation, fewer jobs, and economic instability. On the European side, industries that rely heavily on Israeli products could face supply chain disruptions. For example, agriculture and water management projects could be delayed without Israeli innovation. The financial world is interconnected, meaning the ripple effects of EU-Israel sanctions would spread globally. This level of uncertainty could discourage foreign investment in the region altogether, deepening the crisis. Investors prefer stability, and sanctions would inject exactly the opposite. Looking at the long-term implications, the EU's threat could set a new global precedent. If trade restrictions are used to punish Israel for military actions, other countries involved in conflicts might face similar treatment in the future. This could usher in a new era where economic leverage becomes a primary tool of international diplomacy. For Israel, this could mean that its policies are no longer shielded by strong Western alliances. The costs of military operations would rise dramatically, forcing future governments to reconsider their strategies. For Palestinians, this could represent hope that the international community is finally ready to act in ways that matter. However, there is also a risk of deepening divisions. Israel may become more defensive, hardening its stance and feeling besieged. The chance for negotiations or peace talks might shrink further. Long-term consequences are unpredictable, but what's clear is that this moment could reshape not just the Gaza conflict, but global norms around human rights, trade, and accountability. As we wrap up, the key takeaway is this: the EU's warning has injected massive uncertainty into an already volatile conflict. Whether sanctions are actually imposed or not, the message has been sent. Israel's actions in Gaza will no longer be shielded from economic consequences. For Europe, this is a test of credibility. For Israel, it's a test of resilience. And for the rest of the world, it's a reminder that wars today are fought not just with weapons, but with trade, finance, and diplomacy. The coming weeks will determine whether Europe follows through or retreats under pressure, but either way, the stakes are higher than ever. That's all for today's deep dive. If you found this analysis valuable, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future updates. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the EU will actually impose sanctions? And if they do, will it change Israel's course? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.